Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be looking at the Forcetube. A Forcetube is basically an accessory for the Protube magnetic rifle stock that I've reviewed in a previous video. The Protube is designed to make you more accurate in game, and the Forcetube is essentially a haptic add-on to that Protube. Reading from the website, each shot generates a double effect, the rumble and the kick of the firearm on your shoulder. The effect changes depending on what weapon you're using. Become closer with your avatar. Its features include impact simulation, rumble, a long battery time, some really nifty usability features like auto reconnection and backwards compatibility on any open VR app, so anything that you run through Steam VR this is going to be compatible with. It's got full plug and play. The moving pad at the back of the Forcetube directly interacts with the user's shoulder with a variable amount of force. The website claims this is up to 60 newtons. The Forcetube also has rumble effects that activate at different intensities, so low and high frequency depending once again on what you're using. The battery time lasts over 4 hours on intensive arcade use, but it can last a lot longer than that depending on your use case scenario, and it's rechargeable with a USB-C cable. Forcetube is eyes-free, operation friendly. In other words, you can keep your headset on and not have to faff around taking your headset off in order to make it work. Once paired with Windows, it's not mandatory to use any third-party software on natively compatible apps. The game is directly talking to the Forcetube VR. The companion app has a range of features and is very useful for showcasing the Forcetube for your friends without the need for a VR setup or a computer. So that's basically the kind of description of what the Forcetube is. I'm going to go into what I think of it. To be honest, I've watched a few of the other reviews for this product, and they are very positive, and they don't mention a lot of the potential drawbacks, so I'm going to try and go over everything. And whilst there is a lot of awesome stuff, there's also some other stuff that I think needs to be brought up in order for you to make a impartial decision over whether this is something that you want to own. Having taken part in competitive esports for virtual reality for years now, I have an in-depth knowledge on what is good and what is bad for the average user. So I hope to provide a nice detailed perspective on this product and the other products that were sent to me by Protube. I've written down a list of observations and I'm just going to go through them in no particular order. So the first thing I noticed is that this add-on, the block itself, is pretty heavy, and as a result it can throw off the balance of your usual stock setup. When you're using a Protube, the Protube is quite light, and that's extremely beneficial for when you're trying to be competitive in virtual reality or just in terms of general usability. Part of the appeal of a Protube is that you can get it with carbon fiber poles, which make it the whole package a lot lighter. It stops it from being cumbersome, and when you take your controllers off, it generally stays in the same place. With the Forcetube added to the Protube, the whole thing becomes very back heavy. As a result, when you take your controllers off the Forcetube, the whole thing can fall to the side, as you will see in this footage. In other words, it completely changes the center of balance of the whole package and makes it a lot more difficult to use than just the Protube by itself. In my testing, I did also add the tripod attachment, which Protube also sells. This tripod attachment is pretty heavy, so it offsets the weight nicely and actually returns the center of balance to the middle where it kind of should be, and stops the whole package from falling weirdly whenever you take your controllers off the stock. This was a nice solution, but it does make the whole thing really quite a lot heavier than it would be otherwise. With weight at the front and the back, the whole thing becomes a lot more cumbersome to use, but arguably results in greater immersion, because obviously your carbon fiber Protube is not going to be nearly reflective of the actual weight of a rifle. In real life, you can't snap a rifle up at top speed like you can with a Protube, and having a bit more weight kind of puts you in the world a bit more, I guess. If you're after immersion and role-playing and you want to be put into the world as much as possible, and forget that you're playing a game, the added weight is potentially a good thing. But if you want to be snappy with your movement and you're treating it as a game that you're playing that you want to win at, then it's not going to do you any favors. The design of the Forcetube is absolutely awesome. It fits nicely where the usual stock butt sits, and is easy to replace the usual stock with the Forcetube attachment. It feels very solid and it looks really cool. You can tell a lot of work has been put into the design, and I really appreciate that. It makes it feel like a good product instead of like a kickstarted piece of kit. It almost feels like a design that's been around and built on other designs as opposed to the first of its kind, which is obviously a good thing. The charge time is pretty long, coming in at 6 to 8 hours, but this gives you about 4 to 6 hours worth of gameplay, which is a long time. If you compare that to the average charge of a Quest 2, you're going to get like 2 or 3 full Quest 2 charges in the time it takes to run down this Forcetube, which obviously is a great ratio. It means that you're not going to be having to charge things over and over again You can charge this up once and then keep that charge for a fair few play sessions. The connectivity of this is one of the greatest things about the Forcetube in my opinion. It connects via Bluetooth and you generally encounter absolutely zero issues when using the supported games. The LED makes the connection status clear and requires no third-party apps. It works directly with all compatible games and is extremely easy to set up. You literally just switch on your Bluetooth, connect to the Forcetube, power up the game that you want to play, and you're done. It's really that simple. They absolutely nailed it in this respect. And that also shows that they're really involved with the developers who are helping to build support for the Forcetube into their games. You can tell that this company is really plugged into the industry and they know what their audience wants and needs. Unlike the prototype version which I initially tested, this version has padding on the back which evenly distributes the force, and that's a big step up over the previous model. It basically means that you don't have to have it in the perfect position to feel the kick from the Forcetube. But that said, it does work best when you push it into your shoulder and when it has a good contact, so having your stock set up properly does improve the experience. So for example, if you added this onto your ProTube and it wasn't angled correctly, then you wouldn't have good contact with the nook of your arm, and therefore the benefit of the kick would kind of be lost. So it's important to set it up properly in order to feel the best benefits. The companion app is pretty nifty and it has a lot of features, but most of the time it isn't necessary because the Forcetube natively connects to all the apps that you'd want to run anyway, so there's no need for tinkering. You can just connect it to your PC and it just works with whatever you want to play. But if you did want to do some tinkering, it does have some really cool features that you can utilize. And it is also crucial for backwards compatibility and anything that isn't natively supported. It has a cool visualization which you can use to sort of show off the features of the Forcetube. The features that interested me immediately was the ability to bump up the force of the kicks and the rumble, because the default setting is set to 100%, but the slider goes all the way to 200%. So the second I saw that, I was really excited. I thought if I bumped it up to 200%, I'd literally get twice the force of the kick. But in my testing, 200% kick power compared to default 100% pretty much feels identical. I'm not really sure why this is. If I had to guess, I would assume it's diminishing returns. Like if you put twice as much power into the solenoid, you're not going to get necessarily 2 times the amount of force given out, which kind of insinuates that 100% power is the ideal place for it to be. I'm not really sure how this affects the power draw. Like if you put it up to 200%, it might feel a tiny bit stronger, the kick, but it might result in a greater power draw and less battery life. In terms of the sound that it actually makes, the actual actuation of the solenoid, I actually think it sounds really cool. In my opinion, this actually adds immersion in a weird way. It's not practical or realistic, I just personally really like it. It's nice to have a mechanical noise to go alongside the noise being made by your weapons in the in-game universe. You don't even notice it half the time because obviously you've got speakers on your ears, but I really like it anyway. Maybe they could add a speaker to the Forcetube so that gunshots actually come from the weapon. That would be weird, but potentially awesome. A quick note on the Forcetube's fire rate. I found when using specifically the Vector submachine gun in Gun Club, the shots would sometimes queue up, resulting in a mismatch between the game and the force feedback, as shown in this footage. Initially, this led me to believe that the Forcetube has issues with high fire rate weapons, but after more testing, I wasn't able to replicate it anywhere else. For example, using the fast-firing P90 onward was fine, so maybe that's just an issue with this particular game's implementation. I'll be interested to hear in the comments if anyone else has run into this issue with their Forcetubes. To be honest, my biggest complaint with the Forcetube is the same as when I had access to the original prototype. I realise this is subjective, but it's simply not as powerful as I would want it to be. The kick force feels like it doesn't properly reflect the weight of the product, and I realise that for some people, including the other people who reviewed this product, the kick is probably adequate and they think it's good enough. It seems to me as though this final consumer version compared to the prototype introduced USB charging and a better design instead of an exponentially more powerful kick. As a result of this, there's no variation between weapons. The simulated force feedback from a bolt-action sniper rifle is identical to that of a pistol, which is kind of a bummer. I love the idea of being able to tell weapons apart purely from the kick energy, but I assume that would require a different, probably more complicated mechanical approach. And in this case, the Forcetube's impressive fire rate takes precedence over pure power. It's definitely enough that you can feel it, and it adds a new dimension to gameplay, and it is really, really cool. Like the concept and the design and everything I think is absolutely awesome idea. Nobody else has done this so far. ProTube is the only company that's made a VR haptic rifle simulation, but in a weird way, it's easier for my brain to excuse the total lack of recoil rather than to get a little bit of recoil and have to pretend that that's what the gun is actually generating. I think a crucial point to mention is that unlike other ProTube products which aim to increase or add to the functionality of virtual reality, this purely is for immersion or fun. So it's perfect for single player campaigns and role playing, etc, but it doesn't actually add anything to the usability of virtual reality. It's not an interface for virtual reality, unlike pretty much everything else that ProTube sells, and so therefore kind of is running on a different philosophy to the rest of the products that ProTube offer. Like I say, it's perfect for single player campaigns and role playing, and if you want to immerse yourself in the world as much as possible. But actually all the positives that allow it to do that are negatives if you're treating the virtual reality like a competitive thing that you want to win or be good at. For the module by itself, it's €299 listed on the website at the moment. I would say if you have money to spare and you enjoy optimizing your virtual reality experience, then yeah, it's worth buying. But if you're on the fence or have limited funds, it's not a new type of input like a racing wheel or the original ProTube. It doesn't actually improve or change your gameplay within the virtual worlds. It's just a fairly expensive haptic feedback, but there's nothing else like it, so essentially, once again, it comes down to what you want out of your virtual reality experience. If battery life was compromised for a more powerful kick, then I'd be more inclined to recommend, but that's just what I'm looking for in my haptic experience. And once again, I think I'm asking too much, considering that nothing else like this has existed previously. I've also noticed a lot of comments from people saying that the price is pretty damn high considering what it is, and yeah, I hate to say it, but I do kind of agree. You can buy a Logitech racing wheel and pedals for the same cost, or even a little bit cheaper, and they completely change the way that you interact with racing games. And it's the same for the ProTube. The ProTube, other people say that the ProTube is too expensive, but I disagree because it revolutionarily changes the way that you interact with first-person virtual reality. To conclude, I really do think it's an awesome idea and an awesome product, but it does have some shortcomings, and it would be a lot easier to recommend if the price point wasn't quite so high. But then again, this isn't a big company like Logitech or any of the other haptic suit producers or whatnot, so maybe the price point is actually justified for them pushing this new technology into the VR space. Nobody else is doing it, so therefore you're kind of paying for exclusive access to something that hasn't been done before. And if you think about it through that lens, it does kind of make sense for it to be as pricey as it is. There are no alternatives, there's no real competing products to this. So you're really paying for access to an idea as opposed to a lump of plastic that has some features to it. So maybe that makes it worth it. I don't know, what do you think? Sorry this review has been a bit weird. There's no face shots or anything because I'm currently going through some absolutely horrible dental issues and I don't want to subject you guys to that. So hopefully it was okay. Hopefully it helps inform your decision making process. And the next video to come, I'll be going over the other offerings from ProTube. Thanks for watching. I hope you're all having a good year so far, and I'll see you in the next video.